Proverbs 27 and verses 23 through 27. Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds. For riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation? The hay appeareth, and the tender grass showeth itself, and herbs of the mountains are gathered. The lambs are for thy clothing, and the goats are the price of the field. And thou shalt have goats' milk enough for thy food, for the food of thy household, and for the maintenance for thy maidens. It's a curious passage, isn't it? That differs a bit from many of the other Proverbs. It is a section of Scripture that, especially the book of Proverbs, that I call mind your business. It is the means by which we are to succeed. There was a man, a father named Morris, and I don't think this is a true story, okay? Just preface it. But a man named Morris said to his son, I want you to marry a girl of my choice. And the son said, I'll choose my own bride. Morris says, but the girl is Bill Gates' daughter. Now, if you don't know who Bill Gates is, he's a very, very rich man. And the son answered, well, in that case, yes, okay. Morris then approaches Bill Gates and said, I have a husband for your daughter. Bill Gates answered, but my daughter's not ready to get married. Morris said, but this young man is a vice president of the World Bank. Bill Gates answered, in that case, yeah. Finally, Morris goes to see the president of the World Bank. Morris says, I have a young man to be recommended as a vice president. The president of the World Bank answers, but I already have more vice presidents than I need. Morris says, but this young man is Bill Gates' son-in-law. The president of the World Bank answers, in that case, yes, okay. And that is how successful business is done. Who do you look to when you want good advice for financial matters? Certainly not to the government. P.J. O'Rourke was a political satirist. In fact, he just passed away not long ago. And he said this, he said, giving money and power to the government is like giving whiskey and car keys to teenage boys. That's a good analogy, the way government wastes money. So where do you find wisdom for financial decision making? Where is it located for you? Many years ago, I did a series of messages on biblical principles on managing money, and this was in the day before, I'm talking like almost 40 years ago now. This is in the days before, Dave Ramsey and Financial Peace University was not thought of. This is back in the days when Dave Ramsey was, over his head in debt. He was just learning. It was before Crown Financial Services. There were not many resources. A fellow by the name of Larry Burkett. I don't know, does that name ring a bell? Okay, Larry Burkett had just come out with some of these things, and he's with the Lord now, and others have taken up the cause. But back then, good counsel on finances was scarce, and much of it was not biblical. And the only thing I knew at the time was that many folks in our church at that time were in financial trouble. And so I preached a series of messages, really not knowing, I really didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of, just muddling my way along. But I did find some things that I preached a series of messages on biblically managing your resources. Now, understand, this was not a series of messages on giving to the church. Had nothing to do with giving to get. The prosperity gospel, we don't give to get. God blesses as we give, but it isn't always a financial return. Sometimes it is. I'm not saying God can't do that. I'm saying we don't give to get. But I will say that after I got done, even though I don't think I mentioned giving, after that series was done, giving at the church went up by 10%, and which was just kind of an unexpected blessing for that. Many people, many of us, can use some sound counsel in regard to finances. I don't know of anybody, ourselves included, that have never made a financial mistake. You ever done something you just, what was I thinking? Something you regretted later, and hindsight's 20/20. But this passage of scripture right here in Proverbs chapter 27 and verses 23 and following, God is here giving some very practical counsel about knowing and understanding the resources in our possession. And understand, this is speaking from a rural agrarian context. But the lessons here, I think, are really easily applied to you and I, no matter what our occupations might be. These are admonishments given to us by God to his people, principles from which you and I are to be able to apply and to have work within our lives, okay? Financially, I'm talking. And the first thing he says here in verse 23 is to know your resources. Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks. The phrase "be diligent to know" is an expression. Literally, the language is knowingly know. It's a typical device in the language. It means to really, really know. And the idea is that you have a good understanding of what your resources are. And it means, among other things, that you do not leave up to someone else to understand what your resources are, that you personally know for you. The state of the flocks means a knowledge of how many goats and sheep they own. In context, that's what this is talking about. How many lambs and kids, and how healthy they are. And what that tells us, or what the admonition is to us, is to know what our resources are. Know what you have. Know what your income is. Now, many people think they know, but mostly they only know that they don't have any money by the end of the month. And they're not sure why. And quite often the reason is that they nickel and dime their resources away and they don't know where it went. But quite often people do not really have a firm grip on every dime that they come in, that comes into their home. And I tell young couples especially, know your money. Know where every dime is coming from. And to know the knowledge of every dime earned is crucial, and the knowledge of every dime spent is as well. I remember there were 3 married couples when I was in college. 2 of the couples were very careful on what they made and what they spent. One was not. And mostly the husband was not. I can't vouch for the wife, but I know the husband spent money all the time. He was a classmate of mine. He was always around the snack machines, and he always had some candy bar or some soft drink in his hand, or it seemed like it was always. We couldn't afford such things. I mean, those were luxury things. I remember back in those days for us, a trip to McDonald's was special. I mean, I remember the principal of our church back in Ohio had a Christian school, and our principal came down to the college where we were for a special clinic that they were putting on, and he took us out. Where was it? To Bonanza or Ponderosa? It was one of those. That was been 40 some years ago, and I can remember that house. Really special that was. I mean, it was like we were going to some 5-star restaurant somewhere. Money was very tight, and we knew it, and we were very, very careful. There were many times or several times when we started looking for for dimes and nickels so we could buy gasoline. And, you go to the registers, and look down and see if there's anything that may have dropped down there out of your pocket. That's how it was. But we knew what we made, and we were very careful with what we had. This is what God is telling us here. Know your resources and manage what you have. Notice in verse 23 it says, and look well to thy herds. And the idea here is that there's ongoing supervision. So it's not just knowing what you have, it is watching over how those things are being managed. The idea is that you do not just know what you have, but you manage what you have. And there's work in managing what you have, and you have to develop those skills. Many people have skills in earning money, but they really are poor at managing it. And there is a distinction. When I do marriage counseling, one of the things with young couples I do or teach with them is that you earn your money twice. You earn it when you work for it, and then you earn it when you spend it and how you spend it. And the responsibilities of being a good employee and earning your wages and all that, that's a big responsibility, but the responsibility of how you spend it is even as important. There was a man many years ago who probably made 4 times as much money as I did. And he sat in my living room, we were talking, and he very candidly said to me, he said, Pastor, if you made the money I do, you'd be a rich man. And I said, you're probably right. He made really, really good money, but he spent a lot of money on a lot of things. Anyway, after I finished that series on giving, I was approached by families in our church asking for help, and they were in trouble in their families and in their marriages, and the root of it all was struggling and arguing over finances. You realize, of course, that most marriage trouble doesn't happen as a result of adultery or infidelity. It usually starts in the area of finances, and then arguments start over that, and then other people start looking pretty good when you're fighting with the one that you're home with. And so, and I don't know that these people were near that. I just know that after I got done with that series, they said, hey, could we talk to you? And so I agreed to do that, counsel with these families. And I counseled with them individually. And there was a degree of success and financial freedom that was gained. But I came to a point when I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore, especially with one family. The longer I helped them, in fact, they asked me, and I was foolish to do it, but they asked me to keep their checkbook for them. Now, I couldn't sign checks. I didn't keep their records. But every week I would go by there, and I would bring their checkbook. And they asked me to do that. I did it. Retrospect, wished I'd never done it. Because what they were doing, even though we were making great gains in terms of paying off debts and restoring their credit, we had paid off boatloads of debt. And I interceded for them. I went to the local hardware store who had refused them credit because they owed them a lot of money. I said, hey, listen, would you work with them and allow us to start making payments? And they said, sure. And I did that. 2 or 3 people they owed money to, I personally interceded, and we paid off those people. And but then I found out that they were hiding money from me, that they had income that I did not know about, and they were actually concealing it. And we had certain amount of funds that were going for what we called an emergency fund. And we had must have been 2 or at least 2, I think it was 400, set aside because they're going to need new tires for their vehicle. And so we knew that was coming, and so we were allocating. And I went by to see them one night, and I said, we've got that emergency fund. Well, not quite. I said, well, okay, how much is there? Well, not as much as you think. I said, okay, is there any left? No. And they had spent that on Girl Scout cookies. I kid you not. Their daughter was in Girl Scouts, and they wanted her to win the Girl Scout cookie selling contest in her troop. And then the follow-up was, after they'd spent several $100s on Girl Scout cookies, the follow-up was, and you know what? We don't even have any of those left because her brothers ate all of them. As if that mattered. And I said to them, I said, you know, this is your money. This is your money. I am not about to be telling you how to use your money. You can do with your money as you see fit. If you want to spend it on Girl Scout cookies, you can. But I'm not going to be a part of it. And then have you hiding things, having this come between you and us because you're hiding your money from me. It's not mine. It's yours. So I gave everything back to them that evening. They knew what their resources were, but they didn't want to manage their resources. And this is what God is saying to us in verse 23. Now, very quickly, as we go through this, he is telling in verse 24 the transitory nature of wealth and position. For riches are not forever. And then he asks another question, then doth the crown endure to every generation? And what he's saying there is nothing in this world lasts. Everything's transient. Riches are not forever. They are unstable. They must therefore be carefully looked after. They're not permanent. They're not stable. Even the crown does not endure. Even the king is not sure that his royal dignity and power will descend in his family. So uncertain and vain is all human possession. Someone said, whence it behooves man all the more to make use of care and circumspection in the management of his wealth. People who have wealth know that it is not something that can be just presumed to be always there. Riches are not forever. And it's not something that you can count on, but you do have to work with it. In an agrarian economy, money is not nearly as valuable as natural resources. And so you can't eat silver and gold. If there's a famine and prices go up, money will disappear quickly. And this is true for everyone. That's why he adds in that, doth the crown endure to every generation? And the answer, it's a rhetorical question, right? Does the crown endure to every generation? What's the answer? No. So, you know, this crown, which normally used in a literal sense means royal diadem, someone said may be here synonymous with riches and a royal way of life. But ask any politician how certain their position is from one election to another. They can be out of a job in a very short time. You know, Marie Antoinette had her reign cut off in an instant. There's just a little joke. Every regime is transitory. Resources are, but they still need to be cared for your present circumstances. So he tells them, use your resources. And what are those resources? Well, he starts itemizing those things in verse 25. The hay appeareth, and the tender grass showeth itself, and the herbs of the mountains are gathered. Herbs is really kind of synonymous with grass, describing grassy, shrubby growth. But what he's saying here is these things that come along, these seasons where there is grass and hay and herbs, it's kind of our equivalent of saying make hay what? While the sun shines. And the idea is there are seasons for reaping and working and utilizing for your resources. Now, notice what he says, the hay appears, and then verse 26 he says, the lambs are for thy clothing, the goats for the price of the field. In an agrarian society, sheep and goats were staples of life. Lamb's wool was for your clothing, both in their wool and their skins, so you can have wherewith to make your clothing. Or they're sold to purchase all manner of clothing for yourself and your family. The goats, someone pointed out, were the price of a field. Notice that he says that in verse 26. In other words, you would pay for another field with goats. They just didn't. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't have money, but this was bartering, and you would trade, X number of goats for a field. Why do you need a field? So you can have more grass and herbs and hay and so on. In other words, so that you can invest in a future of your own resources. That's what he means here. It's marketing your resources for expansion. The goats are the price of a field. In other words, you're safeguarding your assets today for the future and preparing for the future. So what he's acknowledging here is that the hay and grass and herbs feed the flocks. The wool from the flocks clothe you, and you can buy a field with enough goats where you'll be able to have more hay and grass and herbs to feed your flocks and provide for your well-being. What he's telling us is not to go out and buy sheep and goats. What he's telling us is not to be trusting in a fat bank account, but to use what we have in order to invest for the future. Does that make sense? It's here. It's latent in the passage here. So he tells us, know your resources, know the transitory nature of wealth and position. That these things, you can't presume upon the future. To use your resources, and then you will see the results of proper financial management. Now look at verse 27. And thou shalt have goat's milk enough for thy food, for the food of thy household, and for the maintenance of thy maidens. There's personal sufficiency. Thou shalt have goat's milk enough for your food. There's household sufficiency, and for the food of thy household, and a surplus for others, for your maidens. Maidens in that day referred to young women who were employed to do work that men did not do. If there was plowing to be done with oxen, generally typically men are stronger, and maybe not in swimming, but typically men are stronger, and they do work with oxen and plows. But the maidens were people that took care of the goats and did other things that were less physically demanding. The point of what God is sharing here and what God is commanding here is that we need to learn how to understand and properly manage the wealth that we have available to use and utilize it in such a way that we're getting along in this world. That this is the purpose, and that we don't, it's not like we're obsessed with riches. There's warnings in the Bible about being obsessed, right? Coveting and all of that stuff. So it's not coveting to take care of what you have and invest it and to seek to have a stable future. That's not coveting. It is good use. It's good stewardship. There you go. So Proverbs 28:19 says, he that tilleth his land shall have plenty of bread. That's a biblical principle there. And sometimes I've heard people say, that are been very profligate in the way they use their resources. They want to sound spiritual, and they say, well, we're just trusting the Lord. Well, I agree with that. But sometimes that is a very convenient way to cop out of our responsibilities before the Lord. When we fail to learn how to manage the resources that we have. And the fact is that many believers who really who are in trouble are simply wasteful. And they're foolish in how they use what the Lord has given them. And they're their own worst enemy. And then they turn around and say, well, we're praying that the Lord is going to meet our needs, when they waste their resources. Now, one of the things that I would ask you before we leave this tonight is, could it be that the Lord has already given you what you need to meet your needs and you're just not using it right? Could that be? Could that even be remotely possible? And the follow-up question is, why should he give you more if you're not using what you have in a way that is wise and glorifying to him? It behooves us to understand how to get along with what we have. Now, I think all of us understand that there are times when there are lean times that come, right? An illness that we didn't expect. A job, that we thought was going to work out and it didn't. And a dumb financial decision, we spent something without thinking it through the way we should. We all do that. I'm not talking about those kinds of exceptional circumstances. I'm talking about people that, number one, they don't really know what they have coming in. They just know they don't have enough at the end of the month. And I'm talking about folks that really can't control their wanter, and they are prone to impulsive buying. That's talking about a lot of people that I've met through the years. I mean, outside of catastrophic health issues or loss of a career, often what the real problem is that there's no gumption to do the work necessary to know and manage your finances. And usually there's a problem with covetousness that is not willing to delay gratification. Some years ago, I was talking with an individual. Both he and his wife worked. Both of them worked. Great income. I mean, they made good money. And I'm not going to tell you a lot of the details here, but he said many times, he said, Pastor, I just can't afford to tithe. I know I should, but I just can't afford to do that. And I said, well, okay, but that's between him and the Lord, and I didn't ask him about it. He just said that to me. And so we went through all that they made. We listed everything they had, all the income they had. And I said, let's just ask a few questions. How many times do you go out to eat per month? And, not very many. I said, well, okay, I said, do you get something, for instance, let's just back it up. Do you get something out of the vending machines at work? He said, well, yeah. Do you do that every day? Well, yeah. I said, what, a couple soft drinks a day? Yeah. Do you get maybe a candy bar? Well, yeah, if I'm feeling kind of hungry, I want something to pick me up. So it was like at that, and this was years ago, it was like $1.50, $2 a day at that point. This has been some years ago. So I said, okay, well, let's figure that up for the month. And when you figured it up by the month, he was spending a significant amount of money. And I said, because he had a second job that he went to after he got done at work, he would go to the second job. And I said, how many times do you eat out a week? He said, well, I said, I usually buy something between my first job and my second job on the way, so I can grab it. So okay. It didn't occur to him that maybe he could have packed a sandwich or something. But bottom line is he ate out every day. And then I said, well, how much does your wife, how many times? Oh, she doesn't do any of that. Only time she does that is once a week with her sister when they go shopping. So, now understand, I could go into other areas. Understand we're talking fast food here. And he had 3 teenagers who were all involved in sports. And whenever they had an away game, they had to have money to stop at the fast food place when they were coming back. Are you starting to add up in your head just a little bit? 3 teenagers, each, going 2 or 3 times during the season anyway, at least sometimes twice, 3 times. Just in fast food, the numbers were astounding. And there were other things as well but he had no idea that they were spending that money on fast food. They had no clue. All they knew was they didn't have enough money at the end of the month, and they couldn't afford to tithe. Here's the killer. Oh, well, it's one of the killers. He said, hey, before you go, I want to show you something. And he went back in the back bedroom, and he brought out this pristine 1910 .45 caliber pistol. You know the one I'm talking about, guys, don't you? Nice gun. And they were expensive at the time. I mean, these things, and I love firearms. I do. And this was nice. You'd almost see your face. I mean, it's a beautiful gun. He goes, take a look at this. And I said, oh man, that is really nice. And then I said to him, there's your tithe. And you know what he said to me? He said, "Oh, I've always dreamed of having one of these." Yeah, I'm sure you did. And a whole lot of other things as well. You see what God's saying here? He's saying, mind your business, mind your resources, and then manage your resources. It's not complex. Now, you may not understand some of those things. Oh, if you don't understand them, you know what you do? You get help. You find somebody that does understand them and help you out. Find somebody who doesn't have an agenda, who's going to make money off you. By the way, it's not going to be me, okay? But I'm just saying, if you don't know, find out. Because this is the responsibility that God gives to each one of us, to mind our business. All right, let's pray together. Thank you, Father, thank you for practical instructions. Thank you for what you've given to us that is so enlightening and so practical and so plain that we ought to see it ourselves, but we get in our own way. And so we thank you for your word and for how clear it is and for your care for us and giving it to us in the first place. I pray and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.